Dylan, you're back. It was Nashville we last recorded, didn't we?
Yeah, it was Nashville.
Wasn't it Texas?
I think we recorded in Nashville since then.
No, something
I
like
don't know.
that.
Never remember. How you been, man?
Living the dream. Yeah, no complaints.
Okay, wild week.
Yep, wild week.
Wild week. Was clearly priced in. What do you make, Volk? Like, what's your view on the whole ETF thing? Because range of views, Bitcoiners have a range of views. Like ultra hardcore Bitcoiners probably think ETFs aren't great. Other people think, no, this is good. This is good for Bitcoin. All adoption is good, even if it's IOU adoption. Where are you at with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly clunky. The whole like cash, create, in kind, all that redemption mechanism. We'll get James from Bloomberg in here to explain that, not me. All those dumb mechanics. But no, I think it's obviously a big deal. I think what people miss is, and everybody's mansplained the ETF. So maybe I don't need to go into a whole tangent for you, but I think what it is the thesis on, at least for me, is there's this massive pool of liabilities that can't be paid down around the globe, hundreds of trillions that can't be paid down in real terms or nominal terms. And so what Bitcoin is doing, 800, 900 billion, pretty irrelevant. Been ticking on for 15 years now. Is it's slowly monetizing on the asset side of the balance sheet for a bunch of kind of sovereign individuals, psychos, cypherpunks, drug dealers, capitalists, speculators. And it's still pretty irrelevant. But it's this little speck on the asset side of the balance sheet, assets, liabilities. And all this ETF is doing is it's getting on the asset side of the balance sheet. And it's kind of, we're getting the piping from the legacy rails, the traditional financial system. And once we get that, similar to how stocks or housing or really any asset class in fiat nominal terms, not in real terms. I mean, for the last 40 years or so, we've seen this bull market where everything, because of the cost of capital going down, has increased in real terms. But in fiat nominal terms, everything, assets have, also like food, energy, everything you really want is going up and to the right because we have this unpayable stack of liabilities. I mean, by definition, the fiat system has to expand. This is nothing new on this podcast. So I just view it as, we're finally, for at least in the traditional world, we're opening up the valve for the asset side for Bitcoin to just kind of Trojan horse onto the asset side. And while we've seen these 70, 80% drawdowns 3-4 times with Bitcoin, another cycle or two, another kind of order of magnitude higher, and all of a sudden it's not just speculators in trouble when Bitcoin crashes, it's systemic. And so we're obviously not there. We're not even close to there. But Bitcoin taking fiat liquidity and going up against this massive pile of unpayable liabilities, I mean, that's the story. And so the ETF is just another step in that process.
Okay, this big, massive pile of liabilities that isn't going to pay down is basically government debt.
Yeah, government debt, but all forms of debt. I mean, there's a lot of government subsidized debt, for instance, like student loans and everything else. There's a lot of housing that's government subsidized. So yeah, I mean, and there's, never mind the unfunded liabilities, right? Where there's, 100 trillion of off balance sheet. Like it's not recorded in the national debt, but I pay Social Security. I'm technically entitled to something sometime down the line that it's not going to be worth anything, right? So there's all these, this is not just a US story. This is a global story. And we've never seen this level of debt ever, and it's not changing. It's not changing with the inflation, being transitory and going back to 3%. It's not changing with Fed hikes. Nothing's changing this.
So why would an 80% drawdown in a couple of cycles become systemic risk?
In the same way that stocks falling 40% or housing falling 30% is systemic, because you have assets, you have liabilities. When the asset side decreases, all of a sudden, your solvency, you go belly up. So a Bitcoin at 800 billion is irrelevant. Bitcoin at 10 trillion is not.
So we might end up killing the system.
The system kills itself.
Well, yeah, but like we'll expose it.
Yeah. I mean, Bitcoin is, I think Caitlin Long, a couple people, David Bailey is also, loves to put out some like hyperbolic bullish statements, but saying like, a systemic GSIB, a globally systemic bank is going to collapse because of, being short Bitcoin at some point in the next few years. Like, I don't know about that. But there are no bailouts in Bitcoin, obviously. So we see face rippers to the upside when, there's not enough Bitcoin. And you also see the collapse of FTX entities when, on the downside.
Do you think we might see a collapse of any of these larger institutions going into Bitcoin? I was talking about it, Danny, earlier. I was like, I don't think we'd ever get rugged by one of these ETF issuers. And Danny's like, no, I think it's going to happen.
I think if they play paper Bitcoin games, there's definitely a chance.
Well, if they play those games, I just don't know if they're going to take that risk.
I mean, maybe, we come back 3 years from now and I eat my words, but
BlackRock's dead.
Yeah, no, I don't, I just think that there's, like, again, I might maybe be proven wrong here, and this may be a naive take, but like, it's much easier to settle Bitcoin than it is to settle gold. Coinbase is doesn't have any interest in naked short Bitcoin, right? Like, no one wants to naked short Bitcoin. So, only people that are trapped in a corner like Sam Bankman-Fried do that, because he was insolvent for a year before he went bust, right? So, I don't think, at the very least, like, maybe there's a tracking error or, a small kind of minor incident because they're not familiar with the rails. But I don't think there's going to be like this conspiracy where Larry Fink is, issuing paper and not buying any Bitcoin. And, I think the most realistic case of this is, and I still don't think this is a high probability, just given that the US has like a decent court system and checks and balances still, is like, a 6102. I would say it's not a zero probability. It's a low one, but it's not zero, which is why I'm not going to buy an ETF. I'm just going to buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, somebody actually emailed me about that today, saying next time you speak to Saylor, say you worried about a 6102, because it is a risk to him. But it'd be a weird scenario, wouldn't it? That the US government suddenly realized like the dollar's dying, everyone's moved to Bitcoin. Shit, we don't have enough Bitcoin. We need some more. Although, isn't the US government, haven't they got like 1% of the Bitcoin still?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I think if the US was going to 6102, they wouldn't be selling the Bitcoin they have. They would just keep it.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
God, what a weird world. Anyway, listen, look, I had to get your take on that, but really, I want to talk to you about your pinned tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah. What sent you down that rabbit hole?
Well, I'm not going to explain it the best, but I really noticed, and I don't think a lot of what you're referring to is this kind of long form post about Bitcoin accelerationism, which is a mouthful, and honestly isn't too unique from like a lot of the Bitcoin theses of like, you could call it hyper Bitcoinization in a way. It's like almost like a rebrand, if you will. But essentially it's Bitcoin accelerationism. It's kind of this nascent sort of mimetic, movement on Twitter, if you will. But it's like a fork of the effective accelerationist movement, which...
Do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah. And again, this is like this kind of deep, philosophical sort of movement that's happening in the Silicon Valley world. And it was in direct opposition to the effective altruism movement, which Sam Bankman-Fried was like the biggest poster child of, actually, ironically enough. But the effective effective altruism was essentially like, look, tech's accelerating in a big way. We need safety. We need to pause AI development. We need to like really have guardrails and government control on all of this. And it's kind of by an extension, like it's very well aligned with like the ESG sort of thing. Like, hey, like we need, you need to hold your hand, like it, and it's very much kind of antithetical to like, effective accelerationism was like, no, we're not slowing down. Actually, the natural order of the world is to increase entropy. It's to use more energy. This is how all biological life this is how it works. We actually take, that if you look into the laws of thermodynamics, and not to make this like too abstract, but the effective accelerationist movement is essentially like, this is the natural order, more entropy and more energy. That's like, we're all optimizing humanity, civilization, life is doing that. It's going from a low entropy state, low entropy energy matter to a higher entropy world. And so again, it's like very philosophical, but they believe that that's like kind of almost they think of like tech in the same way, that we're not gonna slow down, we're not going to decrease our energy use, we're not going to purposefully limit our intelligence, we're going to push forward, and we're not going to apologize for it. So there's like, I probably did a bang up job of explaining the physics behind it, but it's grounded in thermodynamics, it's grounded in physics, and it's a very tech centric, optimistic view of the world. In the AI world, there's like this you're either like kind of in the accelerationist camp, or you very strongly in like the doom camp. And I'm not like quite literally, there's like, look, AI is going to eliminate all of humanity. Like that's what they believe. So that's why they're like, hey, we need to pause. And honestly, it's like similar. I view that similar to like the climate change science of like, look, if we don't stop driving cars, the ocean's going to increase by 7 inches. And it's like, where does that math come from? So it's like similar, like, oh, there's a 35% chance that AI eliminates all life on Earth.
I don't think you can actually calculate that percentage.
You can, which is why it's all,
it either happens or it doesn't.
Yeah. And then, this gets like very philosophical. But essentially, like the reason that I, posted that in like the Bitcoin accelerationist sort of idea is that I think that Bitcoin as a monetary unit, as a network, as and what it means for energy infrastructure is actually core and integral to this thesis. And a lot of the tech kind of investors and like the brilliant minds on the West Coast, Silicon Valley, kind of sort of tech scene haven't put it together. And that, there's been this longstanding debate in Bitcoin of like, look, proof of work, it's inefficient. And like the Bitcoiners are like, proof of work's awesome. But like crypto more broadly, the reason Ethereum changed from proof of work to proof of stake was like, look, we're going to decrease our energy use. The narrative is like, we're going to be more energy efficient, right? And I think my take is like energy and human civilization and our standard of living is a derivative of our ability to produce and consume energy efficiently. And sometimes like if I just say energy, people might think like I'm going to go burn coal or fossil fuel. It's like, no, everything is energy in some form. All like our entire modern civilization is because we can harness energy, right? And Sailor's had 8 podcasts on this very topic. So I'm probably not the best one to dive into it. But the proof of work of Bitcoin and the absolute scarcity of this has really, really strong kind of second and third order effects, right? No one thought at the beginning of the Bitcoin network, the Bitcoin system, that we were going to, all of the positive externalities of the mining was actually not going to be bad, but actually like a huge net benefit to grid infrastructure, right? To waste energy, right? There's all these like actual environmentalists that are looking at this and saying, wait, this is not bad.
Yeah.
It's like, because the hash rate's transparent, we can quantify roughly how much energy it uses, and it uses more than Argentina, and that's bad. And it's like, wait a second, no, Bitcoin doesn't waste energy, it actually uses waste energy.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, again, this is very much a familiar concept to a lot of Bitcoiners. But for the Silicon Valley folks, and when I say that, I mean more so like, like the West Coast US tech guys that are very much like, one, they're all like uber wealthy, but 2, they're like very much like kind of crypto centric, right? Like very much like aligned with like the Coinbase vision of like multi-chain world, and we're gonna solve all of this through tokens. And
what do you think that is? Like, I've got my thesis, but
I think there's a lot of second system syndrome of, look, Bitcoin was the first iteration, but it's very much inefficient. It has to be improved upon. We can do more things. Blockchain can do all, X, Y, Z. A lot of it is just a reinvention of the same system we have on new rails. Like I was in a space yesterday, very much impromptu, hosting it myself, pulled a couple people up. And this guy was like, look, I get all you maxis, but Web3 and crypto is really empowering. We can do all these things that we can do. And he listed basically a bunch of like security. He was like, look, we can put real world assets on the blockchain. I was like, that's a security. And I'm not saying this because I like love Gary Gensler, but Bitcoin's property rights are self-referential, right? I don't need a court deed or a law or a policeman to enforce my ownership. I have my ownership. If you have a treasury bill on a blockchain, you still need the QSIP and the guarantee of the rights.
All you've done is change the database.
You just put it on a new database. And blockchains are actually very much inefficient databases, right?
Yeah.
And so it's, it goes much deeper than that. But
I also think these people like to deploy capital.
yeah, of course.
And I don't think they spend too much time looking at things like if historically look how do you pitch a VC? It starts with like, oh, a deck can only be 10 slides, like you've got to hit every key point and you've got to be able to explain it in 5 minutes. And now you have to be able to send an email where in 3 lines you understand it. It's like, they're so fucking busy. Like you have to explain it quickly. And I think they just deploy capital quickly. I think none of them also are incentivized to learn about Bitcoin. I've been very firm recently about thinking Bitcoin suits the middle class the most.
Yeah.
The working class generally, I don't think have the capital to deploy in Bitcoin, and I don't think the rich people really care about the properties of long-term like wealth preservation in the same way.
Yeah.
Let's not say everyone isn't. We know there's rich people coming in.
Yeah.
Say they came in, but generally, I think Bitcoin is a great tool for the middle class. And I just don't think this fits into a Chamath's worldview.
Yeah.
I just think a Chamath wants to be the next thing and the next thing.
Yeah.
Then I think there's a second point. They've been able to absolutely scam people by just getting early token access.
Yeah.
And then dump it on retail.
Yeah, just dump it on
Yeah.
retail. Like, I just think it's just been a great scam.
Yeah. There's no, there's no seed stage or early entry into Bitcoin anymore, right? Obviously.
But a token you get to IPO at the seed stage.
And the beauty of a token, right, is this was a feature of the whole Solana, ecosystem. And what Alameda Research did was like, oh, I get tokens and they're locked for 4 years. And it's like, okay, fine. But they have a derivative, they have a perpetual swap. And so I go in and I hedge out my entire exposure on day one. And I hold the tokens, they're locked. I actually can't even move them, but I've sold everything. And so, this is like kind of the game. It's like, wait, I actually have liquidity on my VC investments. And so that's crypto in a nutshell. And I will say, like, there's a lot of, I've changed my approach a bit in the Bitcoin versus crypto sort of like debate. And, not that I'm swaying every heart and mind, far from it. But it used to be more of like a toxic sort of like, no, you're an idiot, or like, like F off, like you don't get it, have fun staying poor, and like jokingly. But I very much now, like try to understand where people are coming from and be like, look, this is going to be here when you need it. I understand you're saying it can do all these things, but it's fundamentally a different approach. So I've changed my tune a little bit to be like, not because, you don't need to be like welcoming or inclusive, but I realized there's a lot of really, really, really smart people that are working on this stuff. And then by this stuff, I mean crypto, right? Tokens, all this stuff.
Calling them idiots is ineffective as well.
It's ineffective. It's entirely ineffective. Yeah. And I've seen that. But I think that there are positive, and this is like a contrarian take. I think there are positive externalities from the tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions that have poured into crypto, even if it is malinvestment. And you kind of see this with some of like, for instance, like some of the scaling tech for Bitcoin, right? There's obviously the Lightning Network, but there's a bunch of really smart people working on, for instance, there's like this BitVM it was like a white paper kind of theory. And now they're very much, turning it into a proof of concept and an active working system of basically we can do like Turing complete functionality on Bitcoin. And it's not, the compute isn't on the chain like Ethereum, right? Where Turing complete means it's a virtual machine. It can do every sort of function, equation, system. It's self-referential. You can go, Bitcoin can't do that. Bitcoin's very limited. You can kind of send it, you can lock it, you can create a multi-sig. You can't do the stuff. I can't make a smart contract in the way that I can make a DEX on Bitcoin like you could with Ethereum, right? Which is why all this mind share was like, look, Bitcoin's a dumb boomer rock and we're going to go to ETH. And then, they realized like, okay, well, we can't scale this thing infinitely, right? And so you have these second layers and every second layer had a token, right? But I do think all this money flowed in, right? And because of that, there was a ton of incentive to build and a ton of really, really smart intellectual, like, really valuable intellectual capital, sought to go to that, these systems, right? Like, I think it's started to shift a bit in the last year, but all of the developer activity, like anybody that I talked to my age that was like a software engineer in crypto was not doing Bitcoin stuff. They were like, I'm going to be a Solana developer because I'm going to get all this pay. And it's like, well, yeah, that's part of the misincentives with like the tokens and everything else. But maybe there's something valuable there. Maybe not, right? And I think you're starting to see some of that stuff. For instance, as I was saying, the BitVM white paper, right? The first reference is talking about optimistic rollups on Ethereum, right? Optimistic rollups was a technology to scale Ethereum that was Ethereum first, right? And so like, is Ethereum a shitcoin? Yeah, it is, right? But now we're starting to scale Bitcoin and we're getting this increased functionality, and a bunch of really smart people are like, hey, I want to build on this. And wait, the first reference is Ethereum tech? Like, is that bad or is that good?
So, okay, you know what I'm going to ask about now, don't you?
No, I don't.
Where you will straight away. Okay, what do you think of Ordinals?
Okay.
What do I think of Ordinals? It's a mixed bag. I actually, it's funny because I think there was a bunch of people. So I did some work with UTXO management this past year. I was on the liquid side. They have a VC fund, a liquid fund. And so I was doing a bunch of data and analytics and on-chain derivative stuff with the fund. And, they hit the GBTC trade out of the park. So that's what I was kind of doing. And David and Tyler Evans, David Bailey, and some of the guys on the Bitcoin magazine team got really, really into Ordinals. And I but I was just kind of like, I honestly kind of just dismissed it at first. I was like, whatever. But my kind of always underlying assumption, and I remember this being like a narrative, a maximalist narrative, which I would say like, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, was like, ETH is a shitcoin. All the cryptos are shitcoins. They're test nets for Bitcoin. We're bringing all this stuff to Bitcoin. I was like, yeah, like I'm down with that, and this was a narrative, and I'm just coming into the space and I don't even know how any of this stuff works. I'm very much, not a technical guy. I'm like, okay, yeah, well, it's coming to Bitcoin eventually. So you start putting JPEGs on Bitcoin and monkeys and frogs and whatever else. And is it dumb? Yeah, it's dumb. Like would I, want to buy a digital JPEG for $50,000? No, that's not what I'm going to do. But I know plenty of people do it because we saw the 2021 run. We saw people like, betting on $80 billion in dog tokens, right? It's irrational. Yes, it is. But my assumption or my, viewpoint is Bitcoin is permissionless money. It's money for enemies, right? And Ordinals come along, use the witness data to put a blurb of data that with a second protocol, you can see a JPEG or you can see a GIF or a video or whatever, right? Is that a valid Bitcoin transaction? It is. It by consensus rules, it is. And so it's like, and the people come up to me because like I have a Twitter audience or whatever, and they're like, "What's your take on Ordinals?"
Yeah.
And
Are you with us or against us?
And I go, well, regardless of if like, and it's like, some of like even the people I'm friends with, I've gotten follows or whatever, and Giacomo Zucco, like who I've met at conferences, friends with, like shared a beer with, whatever, is like, here are the funders of Ordinals. It was David Bailey. It's just Bailey, Vitalik, Lubin, Dylan LeClair. And I'm like, dude, I don't even work with the venture team. Like I found out about the Taproot Wizards investment on Twitter. Never mind all that. It doesn't even matter. It's like it's a valid Bitcoin transaction. And if you come to the monetary maximalist viewpoint of like, look, this thing is state resistant money. It's $100 trillion idea, the biggest idea of our time. And, maybe you think it's already won, maybe you think it's still a work in progress, but you're like, look, this is nuclear grade technology, right? And you think that if you think that, but you also simultaneously think a bunch of idiots spamming pictures, but never mind the pictures, like the BRC20 tokens, right? Valueless JSON blurbs that trade, right? That took off, right? It's like the most pure form of like gambling there is. It's like, I think that's something that people also, the critics need to understand is that the people buying this, nobody is duped into thinking there's value here. It's pure degenerate gambling. And I have never once I don't talk about ordinals, not because I'm afraid of like pushback or whatever, because I am never going to go out on my platform or, use my platform and say, buy ordinals or BRC20 tokens, because I don't believe it's not like what I'm standing on. I'm standing on Bitcoin is the best money and the best network, period. And so if you want to put your JPEG on Bitcoin and it follows the consensus rules, do it. And, it's like, oh, the fees, right? The fees, they're spamming the blockchain. And I'm like, look, dude, would it be different if it was a nation state spamming the chain without the picture? Would that invalidate your Bitcoin thesis? If the CIA took 1,000 Bitcoin and were spamming the fees, right? What do? Well, I've always thought that fees were going to go to $1,000 a transaction anyway. So if I want to use Bitcoin and it's censorship resistant, I'm going to pay a higher fee, right? So like, I think it broke a lot of mental models, because you watch the 2020 run and you're like, look at those ETH heads, idiots. Bored apes are stupid. And my opinion then was bored apes are stupid. My opinion now is bored apes are stupid, right? I'm not saying there's underlying value to this JPEG or that anyone should go buy it. I'm not. But the fact is people are, and you, I, or anyone else can't do anything to stop it.
Yeah.
You can't remove it from the chain. And if you filter with your node, right, the whole idea is like, okay, but if we, filter out, we can change the parameters and tweak the parameters of a node implementation and filter it. It's like, great. Well, the people that want the pictures, the people that want to trade these things will run their node implementation. And it's valid. It's a valid Bitcoin transaction. And so like the entire idea of Bitcoin isn't this altruistic thing. It's FU money incentivized by greed and financial economic incentives.
Did you see what Rob Hamilton did last week to get around I think someone bet him that he couldn't send a transaction that was under the dust limit.
Yeah.
And so instead he just constructed a transaction, paid a high fee, sent it straight to a miner. It got mined like 2 minutes later.
Luxor was like, yeah, I like money.
Boom.
Yeah.
And
I think
so
it was F2 pool that actually.
So is Luxor a bad actor or whatever? Like, again, I don't think so personally. But if you want to say they are.
But the whole design was that you wanted miners to be greedy.
Yeah.
That's the whole design of like the mining side.
And I get that. It's like, okay, so you inscribe this data onto one Satoshi, right? So I'm paying, 50,000 Satoshis in fees to send one Satoshi, to transfer one Satoshi. That's illogical, or that's irrational, or that's spam or whatever. It's like, okay, you can think that, and that's a fair, I actually sympathize with those people that are like, look, it's spam, right? It's like, we want to onboard the third world. We want to onboard the developing nations. And it's we want to build out all these, Lightning implementations. And it's much easier to do so when fees are 1 sat per byte than when they're 300 and it's variable. And there's this new BRC20 shitcoin and everybody's spamming the chain and fees are skyrocketing and it's volatile. It's like, I get it, right? But when we're saying this is objective fact, right? Like it's not pro ordinal, not against ordinal. 2023 inscription fees alone equaled all the fees in 2022 for the entire Bitcoin network, right? And so because there was high fees for these, BRC20 tokens and JPEGs and whatever, the economic transactors like you and me, sending to cold storage or sending to Africa or whatever, had to pay more, right? So if you're saying like we can't have these, what do you not like on Twitter, like not saying like I'm on team David Bailey or F you David Bailey. It's like, that's fine. You can say screw you, Dylan. I don't like that's a fine, statement. I'm not whatever. But can you stop it?
Well, so this is why
or are you LARPing?
So this is why I asked you. I've been largely indifferent.
Me too.
Largely indifferent. I don't care. I think they're stupid. I wouldn't buy one. Rob Hamilton gave me one. I've never looked at it. I don't know how to look at it. I don't know how to send 1 sat. I don't know. I just don't know anything about it. I'm just indifferent because I was indifferent about NFTs. I just think I know people say, oh, it's new art. It isn't, because I don't think anyone's really sat there looking at these going, wow, look at this.
The one interesting point or interesting thing is that a lot of the NFTs on Ethereum were like a hyperlink to a URL, right? Yeah. Where the actual inscriptions is data that can't be erased, and it's using the Ordinal protocol or whatever, you can view this stuff. And so never mind like the JPEG monkeys or whatever. It's like you can do some, and people will say, well, it's a monetary protocol, not a file sharing protocol. It's like, well, technically it is a file sharing protocol.
Yeah, but sorry, I was coming to a point with this. So we had Rizzo in yesterday, and we were chatting to him about this.
By the way, I told him, and I don't know, I was like, we talked about this and kind of like the broader, like camps of ideology, and I was like, dude, you are one of the most eloquent here, and I've seen everything in Bitcoin and crypto. You should come out. And I didn't say go on Peter, but I was like, you should put out a 15-minute, YouTube X video. And he called me like 2 days ago. He's like, I'm going to go on Peter's in New York City. And I was like, do it.
Well, he kind of called me out a little bit. He thinks we've been avoiding the subject because we're worried about being cancelled or whatever. I was like, come on, man, me seriously? I just don't care.
Yeah.
I've never found them interesting enough to want to care about them, and I've never found them damage enough to Bitcoin to care the other side. I'm just indifferent. I don't care. I don't find it interesting. But so he came in yesterday, and the interesting point he made is like, he actually says there's 3 types of Bitcoin maximalists. There's a monetary maximalist, there's a platform maximalist,
and network
maximalist, right? I always thought generally a Bitcoin maximalism means only care about Bitcoin, everything else is bollocks, right?
Yep.
Obviously, Rizzo's a lot more eloquent about this.
Yep.
He's like, platform maximalism means you actually think, it's not that you think that's all garbage, you think it all eventually will come to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because even if you don't like it, all the development, all the brain, so going back to you talking about, you have friends who are working on things like Solana, eventually it'll all come back to Bitcoin. And you know what? We need more development on Bitcoin. And those billions being spent on Solana and whatever, Polygon or whatever, could come to Bitcoin. And so I thought that was like a super interesting point. Like, spiritually, I'm a monetary maximalist.
Yeah.
Right?
Of course.
Yeah. When we travel, we're only looking at money use cases. We're only looking at what's happening in the third world with money. We're only looking at what's happening in my hometown with money, or we're only looking at inflation or corruption, or, that's all we're looking at.
Yeah.
There's no part of the conversation where I'm caring about dick butts or monkey JPEGs. I just don't care.
Yeah. The total addressable market is actually like pretty minuscule compared to the money market. Yeah.
But it was a real challenge. He really challenged me because he made me think, I'm a monetary maximalist who can maybe accept platform maximalism, which means like I can spiritually be a monetary maximalist, but like accept the fact that it's good for Bitcoin that all this shit's on it, because it means all the development's there. But then I question myself, then I'm like, but like, if all this shit's on Bitcoin, does it dilute could it dilute what Bitcoin is? Could it, when we're trying to explain what Bitcoin is to be, but I explain it's money. If it's all this other shit, does it dilute it? And so I'm at a crossroads with it all. I feel really challenged by it. I feel like I need to go down the ordinal rabbit hole, but more from an idea of like trying to understand what Bitcoin is.
Yeah.
What really is it?
But if you think all this stuff is stupid and it's never going to work, then let the fee market, which is a free market, figure it out. Like if it no longer works, they'll stop paying fees and fees will drop, and then monetary transactions take precedent again.
Yeah, sure. There's this annoying collateral damage that there's a bunch of people who have UTXOs who now can't use them because they were told one thing or believed one thing, and the Ordinals kind of came out of nowhere. Really,
it's a bit harsh, but to no fault except their own.
Yes and no.
To be fair, like obviously, and I came to Bitcoin as like finance econ and learned the whole, and I'm still very much not like, I'm not in the Bitcoin core GitHub submitting pull requests. I'm not. I've familiarized myself with computer science the past year in an attempt to understand and explain these systems better, and also like coding a bit in Python, but I'm by no means an expert, far from it. But there's people like, and I'm, being one of them, that log in every single day and talk about Bitcoin and read about Bitcoin, talk about Bitcoin. It's almost like a persona. And, if you're doing that while withdrawing 1 UTXO per day for your dollar cost average to cold storage, you should accept some accountability for that, I would say.
Yeah, sure. It's just I'm more empathetic to I'm very empathetic to the different levels of intelligence
there's a learning
and
curve.
competence that people have.
Of course.
Yeah, it's a long conversation I once had with Eric Wall. Is that Eric Wall is so smart, right?
He's brilliant, yeah.
But he cannot understand why everyone isn't as intelligent as him. He just doesn't. I've talked to him about that.
Yeah.
I'm very empathetic to all the people on the lowest end of economic spectrum, intelligence spectrum.
That's why your
technical
podcast
spectrum.
is so successful, by the way.
Well, because that's where I am.
Yeah.
I'm a creative. Like any of these people who like call me a moron, I'm telling you, I'll crush them on marketing, I'll crush them on advertising, I'll crush them on storytelling because that's where my brain is. But you can explain to me. I mean, it took me a couple of years to really get my head around what an XPub is. And I still don't fully get it because I don't get it. I don't get technical things.
Yep.
And so I'm very empathetic to people on that end of the spectrum.
Yep.
And you know, because they are a minority.
Yeah.
Sorry, they are a majority. The minority, the like high technical competency. Yeah, you saying you go, I look at computer science, I did some Python coding. Like you're in a very small group of people, super intelligent people. So I'm empathetic to that end, and I can hold two truths. I can hold the truth that okay, this Ordinals thing might actually be good for the long term of Bitcoin, even if I hate it, and empathetic to the collateral damage to all those people who did dollar cost average at $50 a time and can't get their UTXO.
Yeah.
I can hold all those truths. But
Likewise.
that said, I am at this crossroads now. I'm like, I fully empathize with the monetary maximalists. I do. Because this is what we were here for. A year ago, we were not talking about Ordinals. We were not talking about other data on the blockchain. Or a year and a half ago. It just never was part of the conversation. Now it suddenly is, and we have to revisit our mental model. And like, I'm happy to do that, but it is a whole new mental model now. Like, Bitcoin might not just be money. It might be this, all other shit as well.
Well, I mean, I would strip it back almost and be like, if you are a monetary maximalist, then never mind Bitcoin. You know, let's say that's gold, right?
Yeah.
You'd be like, look, the total addressable market for this idea is the biggest in the world by definition.
Yeah.
Right. It's a communication mechanism for all of civilization and society. Is the price of things. The price in what? In money terms. So Bitcoin monetary maximalism is, never mind. Like if Ordinals and, whatever else is possible, data, arbitrary data, like, we often talk about like, oh, January 3rd, 2009, on the brink, chancellor on the brink of bailouts for banks. It's like, that's arbitrary data on the blockchain.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
No,
I get that. I know.
Of course. But like, if you are a monetary maximalist, you I would say almost by necessity or by definition, would argue or should support that monetary use cases price out everything else.
Yeah.
Right. And that in a hyper Bitcoinized world, if you push it to the farthest extreme, the Bitcoin network is going to be settling trillions of dollars of value a day. And the fees to settle trillions of dollars are going to be massive. It's going to be an extremely robust fee market. Like there was the security budget concerns, the past year or two when the fees were low. And I, got flamed on Twitter because I was like, look, the free market's going to figure it out. We have a difficulty adjustment. I'm really bullish on Bitcoin as a network. I'm not worried about it. And, it was like a 5-minute video. I just kind of summarized it and people were flaming me like, you idiot, you don't understand. Like it's, when there's no block reward, it's going to be insecure and it's going to be trivial to 51% attack. And I'm like, look, I'm not worried about blocks filling up. I'm just not. So, someone puts BRC20 spam on a blockchain and people are like screaming and canceling each other. And I'm like, dude, if you are like, think this thing is the biggest idea of your time, then you shouldn't be worked up over a $10 transfer. Never mind all that. I would say the second point on all this is there's a really interesting shift. And I would just also reemphasize, like, the money is the biggest idea. Like, Udi's a troll. I think he's a really smart guy, by the way. And, we agree on a lot of things, disagree on plenty of others. But he, purposefully is inflammatory with his dialogue and divisiveness. That's by design. He gets what he's doing, of course. And when everyone talks all day about Ordinals and the Taproot wizards and this and that, there's a Streisand effect. You're amplifying the thing that you hate and you're talking about it every single day. But never mind all that. I think there's a really interesting shift that I've noticed personally, anecdotally. I think it's happening where a lot of the crypto mindshare that was like, look, Bitcoin's a big, dumb boomer rock. doesn't do anything. All the devs are just old, cranky boomers, and we're going to go build fast and break things. Bitcoin can't do anything. We're going to build on ETH. We're going to build on, whatever chain. And I think there's not a total exodus, but there's been a bunch of developer mindshare that, post the Ordinals thing, it's been like, wait, Bitcoin, it's like, Bitcoin's fun again. It's like, okay, that's just kind of a joke, but like, who cares about being fun? But there's all these people that are like, wait, I want to build on Bitcoin again. Like all these Ordinal startups, right? They're like, they weren't Bitcoiners a year ago, right? And so the people on the, that are opposed to this are like, it's an attack vector, right? It's like the people that were on BSV, right? Because BSV is this big blocker, whatever. A bunch of the BSV people came over and are doing stuff with Ordinals. And many people are interpreting that as this is a, whether it's a state-sponsored attack or just, because they're coping about BSV and they're supporters of Craig Wright, they're attacking Bitcoin. And I'm saying, like, look, the thesis that I believe is that Bitcoin is the best asset. It's the strongest network. It's the apex predator of this entire world monetary system, never mind the crypto ecosystem. If a big blocker or an ETH maxi or anyone else says, you know what? I'm not going to build on Bitcoin, on ETH or BSV. I'm going to buy Bitcoin. I'm going to write Bitcoin script and I'm going to pay Bitcoin fees. And you're going to sit there with a straight face and tell me that's an attack on Bitcoin? Like, again, I don't even agree with many of the use cases. I think I would say BRC20 tokens are stupid. They're valueless. It's speculative degeneracy. But I've looked very deeply into it. I can't stop it.
Well, that's the bigger point. You can't. It's a bit like ETFs. You can bitch and moan about them and say this isn't. You can't stop them.
No, and so if you can't stop, if I can't stop it from, again, you can run a filter on your node or whatever, which can be trivially routed around. They can just build relays that talk to each other, right? Because it's a consensus transaction. Yep. But if they're going to do this, regardless of what I think, and the blocks are going to be mined, well, maybe if you get enough filtering nodes, economic nodes, then we can slow it down. But just like Rob Hamilton did, you can go to Luxor, you can go to any profit incentivized miner. It's not about Luxor. It's not about altruism either, because Bitcoin is not an altruistic network. It's an economic network, right? It's economic incentives that make this whole thing go around. And so from a first principles, never mind the pictures or the market caps of these stupid things, like I am agnostic because I can't stop it. I think it aligns with the profit incentives of the miners. I think you're in a fantasy world if you think all these miners are going to say, look.
Well, why do you think then the Giacomo Zuccos, the Luke Dashers, the monetary maximalists are, it's like not just the ones who are like, this is bullshit, stupid. I can say that, you can say that, but they're like, they almost like Ocean tried to just not mine any of this. And you've got people, let's loose talk about how you change the code to stop it. Why do you think they're so against it? What's in their mind? What do you think they think is the problem with this?
To be fair to Ocean, that's because they were running knots originally, and now you can like choose how you can include them now.
Yeah, but I yes, because they were running knots originally, but I also think it was an anti-ordinal play.
Yeah,
and then
hey, and I'm all for Luke Dasher saying, this is my node implementation and I'm going to run it.
Yeah, of course. And he's been doing that for a long time.
Yeah. No, and by the way, Luke's a brilliant guy and will know more about computer science and the history of Bitcoin and contribute more to Bitcoin than I have ever done.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sit on here and say, screw Luke Dasher Jr. because I really respect what he's done.
But more generally, the ones who are like,
yeah.
I did. So, and by the way, I didn't realize this was such a sensitive subject. No. That's how indifferent I've been to it. Like when Rizzo said to me, it's like, nervous about talking about it.
You're going to get canceled. And it's like, I went out of space and someone was like, what do you think of Ordinals? And it's like, oh, Dylan's going to get canceled. I'm like, canceled from who?
Yeah. Like, but I didn't realize like there was that much of a disagreement. Like, is this a new civil war kind of thing? And so what the ones who are against it, what is their argument? Like
the argument is it's not an economic transaction because you're sending one sat and paying orders of magnitude more in fees than the value you're transferring. So by definition, it's spam and it should be filtered out. Which, okay, believe that, run your node implementation, but it does fall. It's a valid, like Luke is saying just today. Luke said, which is again, I don't really understand this. He was like, it's all spam, and someone goes, well, Luke, what do you think about op return data? And op return data is just, you can, if you go to mempool.space, you can see like op return, and some people like, there's bots. Ben the Carman made a bot where you can pay, a few bucks for a transaction with Lightning, and you can do a Bitcoin transaction and you can write something into it. It's like he made the software and it just, posts a small transaction, some Bitcoin moved, and it's like, my name is Dylan, and it's on the blockchain forever, right? And he goes, Luke, do you think op return data is spam? And he goes, yeah, should eliminate it.
Oh, interesting.
No, that was today, right? So it's like...
Do you think that's him adjusting his mental model now because he's anti-ordinals, whereas he's probably not cared before?
And I don't know, but there's hypocrisy because Luke Dasher Jr. had a pool, blanking on the name now, something with an E.
A while back.
Yeah, a while back before Ocean. And when you look at the Ocean data, it actually counts the blocks they've already mined. I logged on. I was like, is this a data error? It's like they've mined a ton of Bitcoin. It was like thousands of Bitcoin.
I'm pretty sure they were like the second pool or something.
Yeah. And so, you can't ignore just like how brilliant the guy is. But he was putting Bible verses in block headers without telling the miners back in 2011. Right. And I'm a Christian, so like pretty based, Luke, like, like hail Christ. Like I agree, but like that's arbitrary data. So like that's, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance, I think, and not to call anyone out, but I think the whole crypto just scam ecosystem has soured a lot of people on these
So
things.
do you think this is like PTSD? People just don't want these people in our world?
Yeah. And that's fair, right?
Yeah.
That's very fair. But how can you stop them? And if you think, one, it's like, okay, the first step is the nodes. Second step is you have to convince every miner to ignore profit incentive. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, it's not that much profit. And it's like, no, it is by definition, you're like, put your economic needs aside. This is altruism. It's like, no miner, or not no miner. Some miners are going to do that. If you look at the Ocean blocks, they left fees on the table on what they could have done with an unfiltered mempool, right? So they left money on the table. And so if I'm a miner, I'm mining whatever. Pete, you could inscribe a picture of yourself, and if you pay $100,000, I'm going to mine it, right?
Of course.
And so I don't think that's unreasonable at all. I don't think that means you support it. I don't think that means you don't. I think that means you are aligned with Bitcoin because you're incentivized by profit. That's the only thing that's keeping this entire system going.
Yeah, it's weird. Why have you been aware of how hostile this fight's been? I mean, I've seen a bit with Luke.
Yeah, I think the last couple of months as well, it's really ramped up.
Is it really?
I like on both sides. I think like it also annoys me. I don't want to call anyone out, but like the people who are pro ordinals that aren't like the Udis and the Eric of the world are also getting like very hostile and a bit like catty about the whole thing.
See, the problem is we have a distinct lack of peacemakers, people with the social skills to sit people around a table and talk about these things. It's just there is a lack of that, and I think there's too many people who like the fight more than the answer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well,
that's
and
that's
like
the
if you
thing.
think about how this all ultimately resolves, and it's like gets kind of quite technical when you're talking about filtering nodes and this or that, but like the nuclear option, people are always like, oh, well, fork off and find out, and it's like, well, I don't think we get there. I don't think there's going to be a fork over ordinals.
Well, the problem with the fork is who's going to be who's going to fork.
So
and
in these
whoever-
convos,
whoever forks loses.
Who's talking about the forks? And it's not, it's a couple fringe actors or whatever. But from what I understand, and I could be wrong here, but the rules of Bitcoin now are the rules. So if you want to change something about this system and say we're gonna, ban ordinals, right? And you can run your own node software, of course. But how do you stop me from running my node software?
By the way, please fork off and give me an airdrop.
Yeah, no, and like, yeah, I'm down with an airdrop as well. But like that's just where I am a bit lost with the whole ordinals thing, because like people, are giving me shit for supporting it, and I'm like, dude, I've told people repeatedly, it's dumb. Don't buy it, or do buy it if you want to. I don't care, but I'm not like endorsing a collection. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying like, look, this aligns with my worldview of Bitcoin winning because of economic incentives, and Bitcoin, the asset, being the most valuable crypto asset, the best money, and block space as a commodity being extremely valuable. And for 2022, it wasn't. You could send any Bitcoin for 1 sat per byte, the lowest fee possible, literally free basically, and it would settle the next block.
We need to get the other side and prod and poke.
What, like the Udi side, or
no? Fuck Udi.
but I mean that side of the argument.
No. Well, we need to do both.
Or someone.
No,
but but we everyone
have to,
needs to go and read Jameson Lopp's "No One Understands Bitcoin" article. Like he explained it literally. He wrote this like
I remember it's
6 years ago, and it like I read it again recently. And he's literally describing the entire argument that's happening now. And he says, like, in it quite rightly, that no one needs to defend Bitcoin. Just run the software you want to run. Like, run knots if you don't want to, like, this on your node. Like, that's fine.
Yeah.
No, I had this long debate today. David Bailey made a comment. It was on a space about the BSV people coming to Bitcoin or whatever. And he was like, I forget what word he used, but he was basically like, these people, is
it they got a lot of heart or something?
Yeah, it was a misquote. It was saying hardiness.
Oh yeah.
Meaning like, you get kicked to shit for years and you're still like, up spirited somehow.
Yeah.
But like all these guys are pretty competent like with Bitcoin scripting language. It's like it's a fork, it's very much similar. And they're like, hey, like we're gonna build on Bitcoin. And it's like, okay, is that an attack on Bitcoin? Like, because maybe this is just me being naive and I'm going to eat my words, but I don't view people using Bitcoin, spending Bitcoin, paying Bitcoin fees to miners as an attack on Bitcoin. Even if you were saying, like in the 2017 SegWit fork wars or whatever, the big blockers, Jihan Wu, Roger Ver, whoever it was, they were sending a ton of Bitcoin to purposely spike fees to be like, look, your chain's clogged. We need bigger blocks. But how did that resolve? Well, miners made a boatload of money. Hash rate went up. Blocks sped up. The people that wanted to get in a transaction had to pay more.
And they wasted a whole bunch of money.
Yeah. And the system's unchanged.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to get into block, you paid more. And if you wanted to wait, you waited. And so what's stopping anybody from doing that? Nothing. Right. So even if you view it as irrational or uneconomic, which is fair, which I mostly do, like, it's BRC20 tokens, like from a rational viewpoint, it's like, why are you buying this? What's the discount cash flow? It's like, there is none. It's valueless. It's degeneracy, right? But there's obviously a demand, right? And I think all the crypto people realize like, oh, Solana, Tron, this coin, that coin. No, Bitcoin's actually like, oh, fees are high. Fees are high to spend Bitcoin. Oh, Bitcoin's like, this kind of like, valuable, it's like, it's almost like a flex, right? It's like, oh, I paid $1,000 to inscribe my picture. And that's like, they wear that with a badge of honor. It's like, so, and again, I'm not saying I stand that sort of thing. I'm just saying empirically that is happening.
So where does this fit into Bitcoin accelerationism? Like, if you're an accelerationist, if you're a Bitcoin accelerationist, should you therefore support all of this, because this forces, like, it's almost like the point of accelerationism with regards to energy and climate.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw Konstantin Kissin's Oxford University presentation. He said we should use as much energy as possible and then focus people on building the solutions to climate change.
Yeah.
And so is it the same? It's like, if this all happens, this is going to accelerate layer 2 development. So therefore because I think,
that's another thing.
Yeah.
That's David's point. And that's why he's so, and like,
It's
He
another
does another
layer
thing.
to the Rizzo argument.
Yeah.
If you, it's contextualizing Rizzo's argument is accelerationism.
By the way, the base layer blockchain cannot scale to 7 billion people.
Yeah.
That's not a new statement. They were talking about this in the devs forum, the Bitcoin talk forums in 2010, right? It's going to be rare and a flex, dare I say, to transact on chain. And most people won't even know the difference between on chain and Lightning and XYZ second layer. They'll scan a QR code and they'll have a Bitcoin balance in their UI and they won't know what's actually happening underneath the hood, right? And we're still early in this phase where you're spinning up routers and the internet and you're spinning up modems and whatever, right? Most people now just click Wi-Fi and it works.
Yeah.
It's still early, but most people will not be sending Bitcoin UTXOs on chain because statistically it can't. There's too many people, right? So what do you do? It's like, well, Lightning. It's like, okay, yeah, I'm a huge Lightning fan. And I think Lightning, I'm massively bullish on it. It's obviously still very much in the works. There's a bunch of really smart people on it. It's not perfect. It's far from it, right? Managing liquidity. So it's like, I set up a Lightning node as a hardcore Bitcoiner. It's a challenge, right? And it's gotten a lot better, but it's custodial solutions. It's like, well, just use Wallet of Satoshi. It's like, yeah, well, it's custodial, right? So if you're saying we're going to scale this decentralized with property rights to 7 billion people, there's a ton of work to do, right?
But I do think, we just had Lynn in before you. By the way, she says hello. I actually do think a large part of the Bitcoin network user base will be people using centralized solutions in the end.
Me too.
Custody solutions, trusted solution, Bitcoin banks.
Yeah.
I just think not your keys, not your Bitcoin is it's great early on, but most people won't own UTXOs. They won't be self-sovereign. I just don't think
it's the optionality to do such a thing, which keeps everyone honest, I think.
Yeah.
Is like, look, I'm not going to withdraw because I like having my Bitcoin at Fidelity because I can buy stocks, bonds, denominate in Bitcoin, borrow against Bitcoin, whatever. But if I need to at 1 second, I can withdraw. And if you don't honor that, then boom, I tell everyone and the world knows you're not honoring withdrawals, right?
Yeah, and you're done.
Yeah, and you're done. And I mean, we've literally seen that play out. So one, the centralized scaling will be a part of the solution. But if you accept that, if you believe truly that we're going to a world where I personally believe, and this is crazy outlandish, that sometime in my lifetime, Bitcoin will be the dominant store of value, medium exchange, and unit of account. That's the most bullish you can be. Is that
so? We fully hyper Bitcoinized, and
I think
sovereign
we'll be able
currencies die.
I think I'll be able to in my lifetime trade Apple stock against Bitcoin.
But there'll be no dollar.
There'll be dollars.
Oh, you still think there'll be dollar?
I think there will be. Again, and this is gets into hyperinflation and societal collapse and how does government maintain itself without fiat? And it's this kind of, you get bogged down with it's more so okay, well, you have one side that's fixed and one side that's perpetually increasing. What happens to the exchange rate? And what happens to the trust in the system? It's okay, well, eventually you reach a point where there's confidence and whatever, the supply can take, there's nothing stopping the supply of fiat going up forever.
But that's why I think, if you're right, why would anyone hold the dollar or use a dollar in that scenario?
I mean, why are people holding dollars now?
Because it's an education.
There's an information asymmetry.
If I've got a bank account full of pounds and I know over the space of a year I'm probably losing 10% purchasing power, it's a stable loss.
Yep.
It's just this gradual, eating away. And if I think put it into Bitcoin, it's I might put it into Bitcoin and then a week later
it's down 10%.
Down 10%.
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing for people to do. I've made the leap and I'm cool with it. Bitcoin is 49, now it's 43, whatever now.
Yeah.
It might get on a 35, it might go up 60. I'm cool. I've done my tour of duty. I've got my Bitcoin. I'm here for the long term.
Yep.
But that's a hard jump for people. If Bitcoin just was getting, I even said to Danny earlier, if somebody said to me, you just guaranteed every year Bitcoin just goes up 5%.
Sounds like you like bonds.
Yeah, it does the opposite of, just like bonds.
Yeah.
It was just like that, but it was purchasing power, not nominal value.
Yeah.
If that was the case, would I accept it? And I think maybe I would.
Yeah.
Rather than the risk, because it becomes more useful.
Yeah.
And I just think a lot of people taking that jump's really fucking difficult.
Of course.
That's how I answer your question.
No, I agree. I think the reality of Bitcoin's monetary superiority is going to enforce itself violently, and not violently in societal collapse, violently in terms of its exchange rate as its been doing, whether diminishing returns or there's, at one point there's escape velocity. Like I'm not talking 5 years, I'm talking 50, right? Just so we can kind of broaden this all out. But if you believe we're headed into that world, like, I mean, you never mind the unit of account. Like, there's a bunch of Bitcoin beaches and El Salvador's out there, and half the world is using dollars, and half the world's, instead of their, dog shit fiat currency, is using Satoshis, right? Okay. Like most, if you're sufficiently bullish on Bitcoin, like you should be like, yeah, agreed. Right. And in that world, it's the main chain is not a sufficient solution. Like it'll obviously, that's the settlement layer, right? But if I'm sitting here and you're saying, hey, let's go get lunch, pay me $100, I'm not sending you on-chain Bitcoin because it's like the most valuable settlement layer. It's the settlement layer for all of the world for this 10 trillion, $100 trillion, store of value. So is it Lightning? Well, yeah, Lightning's a solution. Is it custodial? Yeah, custodial is a solution. But the point of this all is that, we're sitting here screaming, crying, throwing up about $10 fees in 2024.
Yeah, wait till they hit $500.
And it's like I, a couple months after like grokking Bitcoin was like, oh shit, fees are going like, oh, block reward goes to zero eventually. Oh, Bitcoin's going to be world money one day. Oh, fees are going astronomically high because the only thing only thing as valuable as Bitcoin, the asset, is the block space. Block space itself is a commodity. So, or the fact that it's, Ethereum style JPEGs is like is indifferent to me. Or, there's stamps or tokens or whatever. It's like, Brian Shinobi from Bitcoin Magazine, he's a technical editor. He's a freaking genius.
We got him on the show next week.
He hearing him on Twitter Spaces is quite entertaining, by the way.
Especially alongside David Bailey.
Yeah, he gets going. But he was saying, look, if this wasn't JPEGs, right, and this was oil futures for Iran, would you be saying this is spam?
People would love it,
right?
People would fucking love it.
Because it doesn't have to be a monkey JPEG in that witness data. It can be anything. It can be literally anything. And Taproot obviously, basically, give you massive efficiency gains for what, kind of data and script you can put into Bitcoin. So yeah, like I think that there's a bunch of smart people realizing, wait, okay, it's still a boomer rock, but it's not as much of a boomer rock as we thought. And so, they're realizing that Ethereum isn't this golden goose that scales infinitely and actually has a ton of problems and centralization and scaling issues on itself. And that, this goes for literally every single blockchain because you can't scale block space infinitely. You can't scale these systems infinitely. So there's like always like, oh, we have the new, like Ethereum used to be fast and cheap, right? Or well, it's still the same block speed, but Ethereum used to be cheap.
Yeah. Didn't Vitalik just say they want to raise the gas fees 33%?
Yeah. The block limit. Yeah. Right. But so I think it's called Jevons paradox.
Yeah.
Where, if you're in a city, right, and there's a ton of traffic in New York City and you go, I have an idea, and you throw on a new superhighway. And then all of a sudden, within a week, the original roads and the superhighway is car-to-car, bumper-to-bumper traffic. And you're like, what the heck? I thought I would... And you realize if you increase the throughput, all you're going to do is... Or if you increase the potential throughput, you actually end up increasing the throughput too, right? So it's not about like, this is the big blocker argument. It's not about how much space you have, right? It's about what you do with that space efficiently. How much economic value density can you compact into a Bitcoin block? And for me, I think literally global settlement value, all of it, right? Or like, a ton of it.
Your conviction is really high.
Yeah. And so like, and I think it's funny too, because there was talks a couple years ago when everyone was like big blocks, I believe, and some, I'll admit if I'm wrong here, but I think it was Luke Dasher and someone else was saying like, there was a small minority amount of support, never went everywhere, where someone was like, hey, let's actually cut the block space.
No, Luke, he said that on my show, I think.
Yeah, okay.
Like
so I'm not making... I'm not
300K.
making... I'm not making it up then.
No.
He's like, let's cut the block space.
He wanted 300K blocks. He said they're too big.
Yeah. Instead of 4 megs or 1 meg.
Well, it's 1 meg, 4 meg blocks per
Yeah.
wait. But I think at the time it was pre-SegWit.
Yeah. So saying like, let's reduce the block space.
Yeah.
So it's filled with, inscription data instead of you just reduce the blocks. Like, why? What does reducing the blocks do? Well, it just increases the economic density of a Bitcoin block, of all these transactions, right? And, it'd make the fees a lot higher too. So in effect, what's happening now?
Well, he wanted the same test, right?
Yeah. And so, like, I forget, I think you asked about this gets to accelerationism.
Yeah.
I think it does speed it up. I like the accelerationism thesis, and it goes into AI and artificial general intelligence, and computers becoming kind of intelligent in itself. That's like a whole nother sort of rabbit hole. But I view it as like the push for this, like AI now is this massive scramble, as it's been for the last couple decades, to basically like test Moore's law. Be like, how fast, like semiconductor efficiency is doubling like every 2 years, like more or less roughly. And it's been doing that since like the 70s, right? And so Bitcoin is like this quantification of it. It's like, I know it's not like a GPU. It's, there's now, it started as CPUs, GPUs. Now there's ASICs, just purpose built Bitcoin miners. All they do is just guess numbers and hash. But we're quantifying Moore's law. And it's, roughly, I know there's more and more ASICs coming online, but the new, I forget what they're called. The new ASICs are
S21.
like the S21.
S21 Pro XJ.
Yeah.
But it's meant to be like wildly efficient.
They're wildly more efficient than the gens that just rolled out, that are wildly more efficient than the ones before.
Yeah.
Right. And so, parallel to that, we have NVIDIA cranking out these GPUs that are better and better and better and better. And you have all these servers going out where I can go to ChatGPT and say, I want to code an API, blah, 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 and do it. And it rips it out in 2 seconds.
Yep.
And then I take a picture of someone else's code, not even a copy paste. I take a picture of a GitHub screenshot and I say, I want to replicate this code. And it reads the picture, digests it, changes my code for me, and it does it in 2 seconds. And so that didn't exist a year or two ago, right?
It's wild, right?
It's really wild. And so there's this scramble on, just general purpose computing to also chase Moore's law. And I think what you're going to get with, the proliferation of this AI is crazy hyper productivity gains. Like, this is what Jeff Booth was going around saying in 2019, was like, look, AI is an unstoppable force. No one really knows what this is yet, but it's going to be the biggest thing ever, right? And when you have this hyper productivity gains at the same time that you have an economic monetary system that requires perpetual growth of the units, you don't actually realize the gains in your purchasing power that you would otherwise, because the money's basically pushing up as an equal force, and you're just treading. You're treading water. You're walking in place where things would be cheaper, right? If there was, like, theoretically, and I know this breaks Keynesian economic brains, but theoretically, if there's a fixed amount of units in the system and everything gets more productive and better, and there's more abundance, things get cheaper. And so the AI, like the AI accelerationists, the effective accelerationists, all these Silicon Valley tech bros that are brilliant, I don't even understand what they're talking about, are like, look, we're going to gun for this. We're not slowing down. We're going to open source all of this. Screw OpenAI. We're going to continue to build. These things are going to make exponential bounds. Like ChatGPT didn't exist 18 months ago. Well, now it does, and it's going to be 10 times as good in a year, right? And never mind 5 years. And so we're going to push this as far as we possibly can, and we're going to get, it's going to be so technologically advanced you can't even imagine. So it's like, oh, that's great. That's great for all of us. It's like, okay, well, it's going to remove a lot of jobs, right? Well, that's what technology does. And if, obviously there's some positive externalities, some negative, but on a net basis, we should posit, at least I do, that it's good for society that technology is advancing, right?
As long as it doesn't kill us all.
Yeah, as long as, I guess that's an assumption as well. And so if we, accept that as true, or not even say it's good or bad, but that it's happening, and I would say empirically it's happening, then, I would say Bitcoin slots right in there as being, completing that worldview, because that worldview with fiat money leads to a total panopticon of government control, top-down authoritarian government control.
Everything Whitney Webb told us.
Yeah.
It's basically a CCP style panopticon.
Yeah.
Where you have a social credit score, right? It says you didn't
KYC the internet.
You didn't even commit the crime. AI said you just might commit the crime, so you get in trouble.
Have you seen it? Have you seen it? Minority Report?
No, I haven't.
You gotta watch that movie.
God, don't freak me out. Like, it might even come out before you were born or something. When were you born?
2001.
Came out in 200002. It's Tom
You should
Cruise
watch it,
film,
though.
right?
It's good.
Yeah.
There's these like 3 sentient beings, like sirens or whatever.
Yeah.
But they can see the future, and they know if you're going to commit a crime. They arrest you for pre-crime.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's like, yeah.
And it's efficient in statistical terms, but it's this dystopian reality when you're living it, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I see a world of arrest for pre-crime.
That's coming 100%.
Really?
They're literally doing like pre-crime analytics already.
How can they arrest you for the potential that you might? I could see how they might want to. What kind of pre-crime are we talking about?
I don't know. Because I don't know what it could be, but
You
they're going to try.
can look at someone and look at their attire and look at their demeanor and say whether they're up to no good or not. Can you not?
Yeah, of course. But like,
Why couldn't software do the same?
no. But I'm just saying, at a world where we actually prosecute people because they might commit a crime, I could see how they could surveil people because they're worried they might commit a crime. I could see how they could limit their access to things. I could see all that bullshit. But literally prosecute someone because they might commit a crime. I don't think prosecute.
Yeah,
but that's like a big leap.
Prosecute in the sense of, okay, your green light's now a yellow light and you can't get on public transportation.
Oh, I could. Yeah, but like that's what I'm saying. I think they could fear people and worry about.
Yeah.
But they already do that anyway. They already do that for, like, there was, who was the guy in...
It's like the predictive policing that started already. It's basically the same thing. And like Dylan says, you might not get arrested and charged, but you'll have certain things removed.
There was like that Muslim cleric in the UK. They like restrict the things he could do or the places he could travel because of the...
How's that not pre-crime?
Well, it's a mixture, isn't it? Because it's like, it's fear of crime because of what he's preaching, because they're thinking he's creating new terrorists and things. So it's kind of like that pre-step for that. What I'm saying is, the Minority Report is like, they would see that guy was about to go murder his wife. We'll arrest him beforehand and send him to jail.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
Things are going to get dystopian as fuck.
Yeah, they will.
I think the moral of the story is, with all of this happening and the general trend, like, never mind exactly what it looks like, the general trend, without immutable property rights, and if you think about, kind of, and Whitney Webb and like Marty talk about this stuff a lot, like the whole energy stuff and the control of energy and like kind of what the ESG, and I think ESG is lost momentum, thankfully, and maybe, that's not true, but that there's also, to control this stuff, you also need to control people's use of energy, the production of energy, and very much like the US is like, no, every car has an electric kill switch in 2035, right? It's like, well, in that world, a diesel truck's pretty damn cool, right? And so generally the trend is to capture finance, to capture, money, and to capture energy use. And so at the same time, and also to capture compute, right? That's why the effective accelerationists are like, no, we're pushing further, because the government's like, slow down. And the Sam Bankman-Frieds of the world are like, we really need to ask the legislators what they think. And the techies are like, no, going forward, we're doing this, and you can't stop us because it's information, and it's just information, And so very much, I saw that all and was like, how are these guys not uber Bitcoin maximalists? So whether the meme's kind of abstract, it's kind of like, it's obviously a deep rabbit hole, but I think there's very much a synergy between the two. So
love it. Anything you want to talk about, or do you want a beer?
No, I mean, No, not much. Just I love how we didn't have any sort of itinerary today. I just showed up and we're like, let's rip.
Yeah,
I was asked, they're like, what are you going to New York City for? And I was like, yeah, well, I'm doing an interview. They're like, on what? I was like, I don't know. Bitcoin.
They're always the best ones where you don't know what the fuck you're going to talk about. Brilliant. Okay, well, listen, anywhere you want to send people?
No, you can just find me on Twitter at Dylan LeClair _. Going to be starting a podcast show of sorts, live show, something, still figuring it out.
Got a name for it?
No, I don't. So I was thinking Dylan LeClair live, but I don't know.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Just make it your name.
Yeah.
Because when you don't, you always think about rebranding to your name.
What Ordinals did.
Ordinals did. Yeah, there we go.
God.
Dylan, love you, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Let's go and get a beer.
Cheers.